Good evening. When he was Mayor of London, everyone knew that Boris Johnson's big ambition was to be the Prime Minister. Well, now, after less than 2 months in Downing Street, is he about to put his new job on the line? There is growing speculation in Westminster that a general election is imminent. The Prime Minister is expected to speak any moment now. Our political correspondent Simon Harris is at Downing Street for us this evening. Simon, what's the latest?
Lucrezia, the lectern has been set up, the protesters have gathered at the gates and the Prime Minister has just chaired a meeting of the Cabinet. It all adds to a growing sense that Boris Johnson is preparing to tackle head-on those MPs bent on destroying his Brexit strategy. In other words, a general election could be coming a lot sooner than we expected. Margaret Thatcher House in Romford, headquarters of the local Conservative Association. Inside, election fever is some way off, but the town's MP, Andrew Rossendale, is primed and ready.
So I'm sending a letter to every constituent, a personal letter from me, making it clear that I'm standing up for Britain and I'm backing Boris. I'm also delivering a card to every letterbox in Romford, making it clear that we will deliver Brexit on the 31st of October.
He could once count the Iron Lady as one of his cheerleaders. When Margaret Thatcher campaigned with him in 2001, she was mobbed, though not all of them were fans.
I think you're the most evil woman on the planet.
Oh, yeah.
Mr Rossendale's East London constituents voted overwhelmingly to leave. He has no time for those Tory colleagues who risk being ejected from the party for blocking a no-deal Brexit.
They have no right to derail a government and derail a referendum which was voted for by the British people.
You were thrown out when you voted against Mrs May's deal.
Totally different situation. This was a withdrawal agreement that I disagreed with. That's a type of Brexit. This is about, do we have Brexit or not?
Around 20 Tories are thought to be weighing up whether to defy the Prime Minister, 7 of them from London and the home counties. Former Cabinet Ministers Philip Hammond, David Gauke, Dominic Grieve and Justine Greening, and former Ministers Sam Gyimah, Richard Harrington and Anne Milton.
I do believe that if we don't take action in the next few days, the overwhelming likelihood is that we will leave the European Union without a deal on the 31st of October. That will have a very damaging impact on my constituents.
For Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, a general election would appear to be a dream come true.
The solution is to let the people decide and call a general election.
But Ealing Labour MP Rupa Huck isn't so sure.
I mean, I feel a bit of a Brenda from Bristol on this one. I was out knocking on doors on Saturday and Sunday, and I don't think there is an appetite for this from the public. They've had elections. I mean, if there really is one this year, it will be every other year of my MP life.
In her office in the Houses of Parliament, she and her staff are up for the fight. But Miss Huck is a Remainer, and so were a majority of her constituents. And like many of her Labour colleagues in London, she would prefer a second referendum. Simon Harris, ITV News, Westminster.
Let's return to our main story. Boris Johnson has urged MPs not to back a Brexit delay in a speech at Downing Street. Our political correspondent Simon Harris is there for us this evening. Simon, what did you make of his statement?
Well, Boris Johnson was almost drowned out by the chants of protesters at the gates of Downing Street. He appealed to MPs to get behind his Brexit strategy, but he also made it clear he will not ask Brussels for an extension or a delay to Brexit, even if that's what MPs vote for.
MPs should vote with the government against Corbyn's pointless delay. I want everybody to know there are no circumstances in which I will ask Brussels to delay. We're leaving on the 31st of October, no ifs or buts.
Mr Johnson described a delay as Jeremy Corbyn's pointless delay. He said, I don't want an election, you don't want an election, but he didn't rule it out. And that, I think, is the underlying message from the Prime Minister tonight to those rebel Tory MPs who may join the opposition tomorrow to try to delay Brexit even longer.
Right, Simon Harris at Downing Street. He hasn't ruled out a general election yet. We'll have to wait and see. Good evening. In just a few hours' time, the Prime Minister faces a Brexit showdown in the Commons, and it's MPs from London and the home counties leading the charge against Boris Johnson from within the ranks of the Tory party, refusing to back his plan on exiting the EU. It's going to be a busy evening in Westminster. Well, our political correspondent Simon Harris is there now. So, Simon, they are taking a stand against a possible no-deal Brexit, but there's a lot at stake for these Tory rebel MPs.
Yes, Lucrezia, those Conservative MPs threatening to vote with the opposition to delay Brexit have been warned they risk expulsion from the Tory party. But today, one of them, Justine Greening, the Putney MP, came up with a plan of her own to swerve that sanction. She says she doesn't want to be a Conservative MP anymore anyway, and she'll stand down at the next election. They seem to be the best of buddies, but that was 7 years ago. Justine Greening was Transport Secretary, Boris Johnson Mayor of London. At the start of tunnelling work on Crossrail, there was a warm pat on the back. But any affection Miss Greening had for her former colleague has evaporated. Today she joined the Tory rebels and risks being thrown out of the party.
Boris, as Prime Minister, has sought to try and, I guess, bring a bit of an iron discipline to the party, but that ignores the fact that MPs represent very different communities, and I've sought to represent my community in Putney, and I think MPs should be allowed to do that.
Justine Greening was promoted to the cabinet by David Cameron. Theresa May kept her on, but they later fell out. And in 2017, her majority was cut from 10,000 to 1,500, making Putney a marginal seat. She's decided not to stand again. Some of the other rebels are threatening to stand as independents.
It is abundantly clear, every piece of evidence tells us that no deal will be deeply damaging for the country. And if that is a service I do for my constituents, whether they vote for me again or not, I'll be a proud MP.
The opposition parties think there are now enough Conservative rebels to allow Parliament to take control of the Brexit process, forcing the Prime Minister to delay Britain's departure from the EU.
It is without precedent in our history. It is a bill that, if passed, would force me to go to Brussels and beg an extension.
If the government is defeated in Parliament tonight, Boris Johnson's next move might be to trigger a general election. But he would still need the support of at least 2/3 of MPs, and that is not guaranteed. Labour, sensing a trap, could refuse to back an election, but this East London Labour MP says bring it on.
I think the public have had enough of this. I think they want to see Parliament concluding its decision on Brexit. And I think a general election is certainly a way to be able to try to do that.
At least we could hear him. Once again, the pro- and anti-Brexit demonstrators were out in force as a divided Parliament approached another crunch point.
Well, Simon, we said it's going to be busy. What happens now and also in the next 24 hours?
Well, in the next few minutes, we're expecting the House of Commons Speaker to allow MPs to debate whether they can take over the business of the House tomorrow. We're expecting the outcome of that debate at around 10 o'clock. And if the opposition have enough Conservative rebels to win the debate, they'll be able to put through a bill tomorrow effectively stopping Britain leaving the EU without a deal. Now, if that happens, it'll have to go through Parliament in the normal way to become law, probably on Monday. But at that point, Boris Johnson will have a choice. He can either ask the EU for an extension to Article 50, or he can try to call a general election. And as we know, he's ruled out asking the EU or Brussels for any kind of extension.
All right, Simon Harris, thank you.
Good evening. There have been a few challenges facing Boris Johnson over the past week or so, but it was an unexpected question from a London MP in Prime Minister's Questions this afternoon that seemed to catch the PM off guard. He was effectively called out as a racist. Labour MP for Slough, Tan Singh Desi, demanded that Mr Johnson apologise for derogatory and racist remarks he'd previously made comparing Muslim women to letterboxes. His passionate address prompted a rare move by MPs in the chamber, a round of applause. Our political correspondent Simon Harris reports.
Boris Johnson didn't go to stage school. Instead, he spent 8 years crafting his performance skills in the monthly Mayor's Question Time at City Hall. So today was always likely to follow the predictable script of gags and barbs, like this one aimed at Jeremy Corbyn.
There's only one chlorinated chicken that I can see in this house, and he's on that bench.
It wasn't a vintage performance, and the showstopper came from the Labour MP for Slough. Tan Desi demanded an apology from the Prime Minister for his now notorious newspaper article about Muslim women.
For those of us who from a young age have had to endure and face up to being called names such as Towelhead or Taliban or coming from Bongo land, we can appreciate full well the hurt and pain felt by already vulnerable Muslim women when they are described as looking like bank robbers and letterboxes. When will the Prime Minister finally apologise for his derogatory and racist remarks?
Applause isn't a normal part of parliamentary procedure, but Mr Dessy got an ovation from Labour colleagues. The Prime Minister didn't apologise.
Can I just say to the honourable gentleman that if he took the trouble to read the article in question, he would see that it was a strong Liberal defence, as he began his question by saying, of everybody's right to wear whatever they want in this country.
And then he turned from defence to attack.
What we have yet to hear from anywhere in the Labour Party is any hint of apology for the virus of anti-Semitism that is now rampant in their ranks.
Muslim organisations were unimpressed.
You can't have someone like Boris Johnson make offensive comments about a huge section of society that's already marginalised and not expect a backlash. Following his comments, we saw a huge surge in Islamophobic hate crime. The reports this week showed that there was a 375% increase in attacks that week.
History will record today as Boris Johnson's first appearance at Prime Minister's Questions. It was also the day a serving Prime Minister was accused of making racist remarks. Simon Harris, ITV News.
Well, Simon Harris has joined us in the studio to try and make sense of all of this. Now, Simon, MPs are voting tonight on whether or not to block a no-deal Brexit, but the PM is hoping for another election. Is he likely to get that?
Well, this afternoon, as you say, MPs took control of the House of Commons to introduce a bill to delay Brexit by 3 months. And at the moment, they're in the Commons debating a series of amendments before that bill becomes law, probably on Monday. Boris Johnson's response tonight is likely to be to ask Parliament if he can call a snap election. He needs the backing of 2/3 of MPs to do that, and he's unlikely to get that when it goes to a vote tonight. However, he can try again, probably in a couple of days, when he will only need the backing of half of the MPs. And that, at that point, he expects to win. So a general election, if he gets his way, is very much still on the cards. On October the 15th, we might not know for certain. It might not be confirmed for a couple of days.
OK, Simon, thanks very much for that. Well, there have been so many twists, turns and unexpected announcements over at Westminster in the past few days. It's been difficult to know for sure exactly what's going to happen next. But what we do know is that another motion for a general election will be put forward on Monday, but it won't necessarily pass. Though in Kensington even, the most marginal seat in the country, they are preparing to go to the polls. Our political correspondent Simon Harris reports.
In Notting Hill, the sound of a steel drum is never far away. And on Portobello Road, you don't have to go far either to hear what people think of Boris Johnson's first 6 weeks in charge of the country.
Chaos. It's like the blind leading the blind.
I think he's being a trickster.
Boris has got a lot of enthusiasm, and let's hope that he wins and we get some sort of decision on this.
This is a place which proves in politics the unthinkable can happen. For as long as anyone can remember, voters in this affluent West London suburb elected a Conservative MP, often with a thumping majority. But then, in the 2017 general election, the Labour candidate, Emma Dent Coad, did what no one expected. She won. Suddenly, Kensington had a Labour MP. She's in no doubt Boris Johnson's Brexit strategy will be a defining issue in the next election.
My opponent, prospective opponent, and many of the senior Conservatives on the council are Brexiters and they support his position. But what I'm finding is that they're completely out of step with a vast majority of the electorate out there.
The Conservatives have chosen a new candidate to try to win back the seat, Felicity Buchan.
I think the majority of Kensington residents realise that we've had the referendum and we do need to get on and implement Brexit. We cannot have this interminable delay.
But in Kensington, it isn't all about Brexit. Grenfell Tower casts a shadow over this constituency. Voters will have to wait many months, maybe years, for the final conclusions of the official inquiry into the tragedy. But it seems they won't have to wait long for an election.
We're certainly ready here in Kensington for a general election, should it take place.
Well, we've been campaigning all summer. We campaign most of the year round. So in theory, we will be ready to get into election mode.
When Labour won this seat 2 years ago, just 20 votes separated the two parties. Kensington is the most marginal constituency, not just in London, but in England.
Well, there's much more on that later tonight on our political programme, The Late Debate. Here's Simon again with what's coming up.
On The Late Debate tonight, we'll be asking, has Boris Johnson lost his touch? Throughout his time as London Mayor, his party regarded him as a winner, able to reach voters other politicians couldn't. But this week, the Prime Minister appeared to stumble from one disaster to another. We'll be talking to Dominic Grieve, one of 8 MPs from London and the home counties to lose the whip after voting to delay Brexit. And we'll be asking a Conservative Deputy Chairman to defend the man at number 10. Join me for The Late Debate here on ITV after news at 10.